Minute. So yes, once again, thank you for joining us today for the session, which is about deep dive into Azure Function. My name is Disha Kamra, and I am Cloud Architect and Consultant here in Decode Cloud Solution. So let's get started with. And I hope I'm audible to you. If you can please give me a confirmation, that would be really very nice. You can type in at the chat window or raise your hand if I'm pretty loud and clear to you. So I assume as an yes here. So let's get started. So here in the session, we are going to provide you an introduction to Azure Function. What can we do with Function? Azure Function scaling hosting concept, some concept related to triggers and binding, and there will be a short demonstration in there. So without getting into delay, so uh, I want to know about how much you know about Azure Function. What do you mean by Azure Function? Any idea? You can type in the chat window. Okay, so let me explain it. So Azure Function let you develop serverless application on Microsoft Azure. You can write just the code you need for the problem at hand and without even worrying about the whole application or the infrastructure to run it. So when I say Azure Function, it is a solution for easily running small piece of code, or I can say in double quotes, functions in the cloud. You can write just the code you need for the problem in hand and without worrying about the whole application or the infrastructure to run it. Function can be make development even more productive, and you can use your development language of choice such as C Sharp, Node.js, Java, Python, PHP, and pay only for the time your code is running and trust Azure to scale as is needed. So Azure Function let you develop serverless applications on Microsoft Azure. So function is a great solution. We know that for processing data or integrating the system, working with Internet of Things, and building simple APIs and microservices. So consider your function for the tasks such as image or order processing, file maintenance, or any tasks that you want to run on the schedule. So this is about the Azure function. Now what I can do with that, or what you can do with that. See, function is a great solution for processing data, integrating system, working with Internet of Things, and building simple API and microservices as I have explained in the previous slide. So considering the function for tasks like image, processing, and all those, even Microsoft Azure is providing function is provided in the templates to get you started with the key scenarios. And Azure function supports trigger, which are way to execute of your code and binding and simplifying your coding for input and output data. So Azure include a series of template you can use for the key scenario, which I have listed in this slide. So when I talk about what are the scenario, what you can do with the functions in there, here I'm talking about, yes, you can go and run code based on HTTP request. You can schedule your code to run at the predefined time. You can process new and modify code for your Cosmos DB document, which is your database related, then storage blob, the storage account, then whatever, whenever there is an image or some kind of data to be put in there, you trigger an event and accordingly some function will be executed to take care of some events in there. And, and then we it respond to the event grid event by using the subscription or filter and so on. So we will see that what kind of a integration we are talking about in here. Okay, so next, what we mean by the function integration in there, because it is really very important to understand the entire architecture of. So Azure Function integrate with various Azure and even third-party services. These services can trigger your function and start execution, or they can serve as an input and output for your code. So the following service integration are supported by the Azure. Like I was talking about earlier as when we talk about, like I am talking about the Azure function, the storage account. So storage account have various type of queue, blob, and table. We can integrate it with our service bus, which is taking care of the topics and the queue. We can talk about this Trello, which is a SMS message. We can talk about the Cosmos TV. We can talk about the Event Hub and anything which you are able to see in here. So that's very clear. That's really very clear that what kind of a things we are talking about in here. So basically, when we talk about the integration is provided by the various Azure and the third-party services. So going forward in there, Azure function runs into different type of modes. So here we are talking about the plans, because we know that Azure function is something which is serverless, which means, of course, even if I'm going to deploy that on a cloud still need an infrastructure to run that services or kind of applications which you are running in there. That's really very important. So Azure function run the different mode. We have the consumption plan, we have the Azure App Service plan. The consumption plan is automatically allocate the compute power when your code is running in there. So going deeply into there, when we talk about the scaling and hosting concept, so even before we jump into these kind of a plan, so when you create a function app in Azure, you must choose a hosting plan for your application. So there are three application or hosting plan which are available under the Azure function. One is the consumption plan, other is the premium plan, and the third one is the app service plan. So the hosting plan you choose is dedicate on the behavior, how we are talking about how your function app is scaled, how you want to scale it up, the resources which avail to each function app instance, and support for the advanced features like you want to do VNet connectivity. So when I'm talking about in here for consumption and premium plan, both of these plans are automatically added on the compute power when your code is running. Your app is scale out when you need to handle a load, and scale down when your code is stopped running. So for the consumption plan, you also don't need to pay for the idle virtual machine or the reserve capacity in advance. However, when we go into premium plan, that's provide the additional feature such as the compute instant, the ability to keep instant warm indefinitely, and the VNet connectivity. While this app service plan will allow you to take the advantage of dedicated infrastructure which you manage, and your app function app does not scale based on the event, which means it's never scaled down to zero. Okay, so that's required that it should be always on. So when we talk about all those kind of a plan in here, basically if I give you a more in depth on the consumption plan, basically, so when you are using the consumption plan, the instances of your Azure function host are dynamically added and removed based on the number of incoming events. So this serverless plan scale automatically, and you can charge for the compute resources only when your functions are running. So on a consumption plan, a function execution times out after the configurable period of time. So consumption plan is a default hosting plan and offers the benefits like pay only when your functions are running, scale out automatically and even during the periods of high load. And the other plan which we are talking about in here, which is the premium one, that is using the instance of the Azure function host, which are added and removed based on the number of incoming events, just like the consumption plan. Now you will say, Disha, how that make a difference in there? How this is not very similar to the consumption plan, but premium plans support the features like VNet connectivity, unlimited execution duration, the premium instant size, like 1 core, 2 core, 4 core instant, and it is more predictable for the pricing. But instead of the billing per execution and memory consumption, billing for the premium plan is based on the number of core seconds and memory used across needed and pre-warmed instant. At least one instant must be warm at all the time per plan. So when you are running JavaScript function on a premium plan, you should choose an instant that is fewer virtual CPUs in there. Okay. Now let's talk more deeply about app service plan in here. Um, so your function app can also run on the same dedicated virtual machine, but here we are talking about the app service plan. So app service plan come with the three model: basic, standard, and premium, and isolated SKUs. So in my demonstration, I'm going to show you uses of app service plan. So when we talk about considering the app service plan, what are the situation, what are the scenarios where we are going to take care of this app service plan in the function app? So you should have existing and underutilized virtual machine that is already running other app service instance, and you want to provide a custom image on which you run your function. So here you pay the same for the function app in the app service plan as would for other app service resources like web app. So with an app service plan, you can manually scale out by adding more VM instant. You can also enable the auto scaling. And when you are running JavaScript function on app service plan, you should choose a plan that has a fewer virtual CPUs. However, there is something, and I will show you in a demo that what we are really talking about in here. Okay, so it has to be, if you are running on an app service plan, you should enable the app service always on setting so that your app function run correctly on the app service plan and the functions run out, runtime goes idle after a few minutes of inactivity. So that's something we are talking about in here. Do let me know if you have any question, please. You can type in or you can raise your hand. I can unmute you. Okay, I will wait for a few seconds. If no response, then I will continue with my session. Okay, I assume there is no question. So let's proceed further in there. So um, let's talk more about on the architect point of view. Now, when we talk about Azure function, especially the hosting part of, the Azure function are designed to be portable and to be hosted on variety of places, which include the Azure function service by using the resources consumption, okay, which we have already talked about in the previous slide. Here we are talking about the same, that where you want to host, which plan you want to execute, used in the Azure function consumption plan, app service plan, or the premium plan. And even in the consumption plan where your code will be running, either you are want to just picking up the function code, which operating system you are going to, which platform will be decided based on the consumption plan you are selecting. Okay, I'm talking about the hosting part, not on the development. In the local development machine, you can use your local VS code and you use the Azure, you create the Azure function on your Azure portal or using CLI. So your editor can be online, your editor can be on your own system, and then we talk about which particular operating system you are designing that system. But when you are hosting, you need to select a plan. You need to define whether that's a code or a container, and accordingly, like this will support the container, and of course both of them will be supporting, and which operating system you are doing for. So when we talk about the Azure function service by using the consumption premium or the app service plan and internet of the things in there. Now here this is variety of places we are talking about, which even include the containerization, which means when I talk about the Azure function, okay, so we are talking about the where we can go for the hosting for IoT devices, for the Azure host, for the non Azure host or on premises. So it's also support the Azure service that support the containerization, which is Azure Kubernetes service, the service fabric, or your Azure container instance, or your non-Azure host, which can be Kubernetes, virtual machine, another cloud provider, or it can be your on-premises by using the app service on the Azure stack. Now, we have seen that where your Azure function can be hosted. Let's talk about the trigger. Now, when we are talking about uh, the trigger, okay, so here in this session we do need to, even before jumping into trigger, it is really very important to understand the basic concept in terms of understanding the scaling behavior, which we have missed talking about in the previous slide. See, um, before even coming to trigger, when we are talking about the hosting, scaling can vary on the number of factors. The scaling uh, based on the trigger, the language you are selected, or there is a few scaling behavior which we are aware of. For example, I'm just giving you a couple of example before we start with the trigger point of. Like if I'm talking about for HTTP triggers, a new instant will only be allocated at most once every 1 second. And if I'm talking about non-HTTP triggers, new instance will only be allocated at most once every 30 seconds. So what about if I have a single function app which only scale up to maximum 200 instance? So a single instant may process more than one message or request a time through. So there isn't a set limit or a number of concurrent execution. So now there is a need come for the Azure function triggering and binding concept. So in couple of slides, I will be talking about both of these concepts, followed by which we are going to see a short demonstration how to use the Azure function. Now, when we talk about trigger what cause a functions to run means why this Azure function will be running. So trigger define how a function is invoked, and a function must have exactly one trigger. So trigger can be associated with the data, which is often provided as a payload of the function. And when we talk about the binding to the function is a way of declaratively collecting another resource to the function and will be connected as an binding, okay, from where I'm taking the input, and the output binding, which is used for the execution. So you can mix and match the different binding to suit your need. So while we are talking about near definition, let's see and even talk about more. So in short, I can say a trigger define how a function is invoked. In short, when a function must exactly one trigger should be associated with a data, which is usually payload for this. So let's see what are the different type of trigger for the Azure services, which we are talking about in here. So if I talk about trigger based on some of the common scenario in here, so let's talk about the HTTP trigger, the trigger execution for your code by using the HTTP request. So we are going to see a demonstration on this. Then we have something like schedule timer, which is known as the timer trigger, which means we are going to execute, clean up, or other batch tasks on the predefined schedule. So So on, we have the trigger based on the third party services, like we talk about GitHub webhook, which respond to the event that occurs in your GitHub repository, and generic webhook will process the webhook HTTP request from one any service that support the webhook. And then we can have a trigger based on the Azure services like Cosmos DB, where we process the something if I'm talking about Cosmos DB, we process the Azure Cosmos DB documents when they are added or updated in the collection in NoSQL database, then there will be a trigger. Or we can talk about the blob trigger, where the we process the Azure storage blob, like I put a container in the storage account. Within the storage account, if something is added into that container, you might use this function. Maybe the image resizing or some data has been, or some image or some file be put, you will get a trigger. You can have a queue trigger which respond to the messages as they arrive in the Azure storage queue. You can have a trigger on event hub, okay, which means you respond to the events which is delivered to the Azure event hub, and particularly useful in the application instrumentation like user experience or workflow processing or internet of things. Or you can even have a trigger for service bus, like service bus queue trigger, where you connect your code to your other Azure services or on-premises services by listening to message queue. Or you can have a trigger on Azure bus topic trigger, where you connect your code to the other Azure services or on-premises services by subscribing the topics. So let's see, when we talk about input and output binding. So in input and output binding provides a declarative way to collect the data from within your code. So binding are optional, and Azure function can have multiple input output binding. So you can able to see that when we are talking about a trigger is giving a input binding, yeah, our service can give a input binding, and then this function is running and will provide an output binding for the service which is required. So Azure function can have multiple input and multiple output binding in there. So what is binding? So trigger and binding let you avoid hard coding the detail of the services that you are working with. Your function receive data, for example, the content of the queue message in the function parameters, and you send that data, for example, to create a queue message. So by using the return value of the function, like I'm using a language C sharp or C sharp script alternative way to send the data, are the out for the parameter and collecting the object in there. So let's see an example. And in this example, the Azure function is triggered by reoccurring. So you can see there is a scheduled one, okay, triggered by the reoccurring schedule nightly, and queries of your Azure Cosmos DB for a set of documents. So the function then process the document output blob to the Azure storage and output logs to the event hubs. So this is what it is. So where what binding we have done? We have done binding for the input, for the output, and these we have scheduled a trigger timely for the nightly basis, and the input binding is getting the set of data. So um, what are the best practices we are talking about in here, with some of the basic concept we have just discussed about what is Azure function, why I use it, what is trigger, what is binding, how we host it, and what are the different plan in there. So one a couple of these are some of the best practices I would like to share with you, like avoid running long running function, which means we are talking about large long running functions which can cause unexpected timeout issue. A function can become large due to many Node.js dependency, or importing the dependency can also cause the increased load time to result in the unexpected timeout. And dependency are loaded both in there. Like a single module loaded by your code may load its own additional module. Okay, so try to avoid that. Then cross-function communication. Okay, so when we talk about cross-function communication, durable functions and Azure Logic apps are built to manage the state transition and communication between the multiple functions. So if you are not using durable function or logic function apps to integrate into multiple function, it is generally a best practices to use the storage queue from cross-function communication, and the main reason is storage queue is less costly and much easier to provision. And yes, of course, the write stateless function. So write function to be stateless. Function should be stateless, and if possible, associate any required state information within your data. For example, like an order being processed would likely have an associated state member. A function could process an order based on that state while the function itself remain stateless. So last one is, which I give you as a best practice, write the defensive function. Assume that your function could encounter an exception at any time. Design your function with the ability to continue from a previous fail point during the next execution. So these are some of the best practices. And let's start with the quick demo on Azure function. Do let me know if you have any question. Okay, I take it as a no, and let's get started with the demo. So to start with the demonstration, let me open my account. So here we go. And let me show you a very quick steps to be followed in there. So what we are going to do is I'm going to create a very I have already logged into Azure portal, and let me create a function. Okay, and to create that, let me create an inner resource. I will search for function app, and let me create one. Now I'm using one subscription in here. I don't have any resource group which I have created. So let me create one with the name of serverless. So I have created a resource group. Let me give this name as in my function app. Let me see if this name is available. Okay, this is taken. Uh, Maybe this will work. And where I'm going to publish it, either I can select the Docker container, and I'm going to show you a very simple demonstration on using a code where I want to run. As I was talking about, that supports the multiple runtime stack. You can see currently it is supporting the .NET, Node.js, Python, Java, PowerShell core, and even the custom handler. So I'm going to select a .NET 1, and it's supposed to version 6 and 3.1. Let me select 3.1. I'm going to select and deploy this on East US. So what I have done so far, I have created a new resource group where I'm going to deploy this function app, and I'm using a run stack of .NET using a code. If I have selected a Docker container, then it will be asking me that, okay, if you are selecting a container at the time of the hosting, I have to define that from where I need to pick up my Docker image. Okay, so let's go with a simple one. Let me reselect everything again and click on hosting. Now here it is talking about that every time when you create a app function, you have to provide a general purpose account which will be supporting the blob, queue, and table storage, which will be part of your function app. See, If I'm not going to select any one which is already available, it will create a new, or I can create a new one account as in, let's say, my function storage 01. Okay, this is not available. Let me see. Let's take demo storage. Okay. And here, which operating system I want to use? Let's say I want to go ahead with Windows environment. And here, this is what we are talking about, that what are the different type of plans are available. So I'm going to show you this for app service plan, and let me show you how this will work. So automatically it will either you create your one or you select the by default name, and by default it is providing you the standard as well. And let me show you what do I mean by this. So when we talk about the app service plan, here I just need to select a plan and I will be responsible to pay back, and the amount will be deducted from my subscription accordingly. Okay, so this is talking about there are three different workloads available in there, like the dev and test. The recommended one are these. Then we have the protection, and if you need a more isolated one, you can do that as well. Okay, but I'm staying with the it has more, even more options available, like what is the pricing tree. You can see the tiering, um, kind of a monthly thing is coming in here, that how much you will be end up paying if you use this plan. Okay, like this has the S2, which has 200 total ACUs, 3.5 GB memory, a series of compute equipment available. The one which I have selected or provided by default here at this time, you can see it's providing me 100 total of ACUs, 1.75 GB memory, a series of compute. So it's giving me the compute details, compute which has the memory, everything in there, and how much estimated per month I need to pay back. Okay, so let me select this, apply this, and let's go and just simply review and create. Before even it's created, okay, it's give me a summary for a quick review, that okay, just gadget know that what you have selected for this, and let me create this service plan. So while this is creating, this will take a couple of seconds. Once this will be created, you will able to see the app service plan will give you this will be giving you a site to browse in, which is a by default one. So what are the resources it is going to create it? You can see that the components, the storage account, even it's creating a server form which is using this app service plan which we have selected. Okay, because I need not to be worry about that whether my resources will be available. I just need to worry about that my code will be up and running and able to provide that details. Okay, so this is created. Let go to the, and let me, even before doing that, let me create on browse. This will open a by default page which is created. You can see that the function app is running. Let me create a function now. I will go on my left hand side here under the function. I have functions. I will click on create. I'm going to create an HTTP one triggered function. Okay. So here I'm going to select the HTTP trigger. You can see there are a lot of templates available in here. So HTTP trigger will create a function that will run whenever it receive any HTTP request based on the data, body on the query string. You do have, like I was talking about, you can trigger based on the timer, you can go for service bus, or you can create a blob storage that something is going on, but for there you need to write a code. And I'm sorry, this is just a webinar. I have a time limitation here. In future, if we are going to do a workshop where I'm going to plan to spend 2 hours of time with you guys to get into a depth of, so I will show you a various other trigger where we will be writing code using the Visual Studio Code, or the Visual Studio Code online, whatever is there. Okay, so you can see there are so many templates already available. So let me select the HTTP trigger. I keep the by default name in here for now. You can see the function authorization level is, so I keep it as in function for now. And let me create this. So this is going to create a HTTP trigger function, which you will see that it is up and running, but I want to test it before even I go and get the function URL. I want to do a small testing in there. So what I'm going to do, I'm sorry, let me go to code and test. So this is a function which is automatically created at the time of I have selected the trigger. Okay, that template. So you can see this will be triggered based on a query, and this query will trigger and will pass on a message. Okay, there's something which you have passed on. So let me do this testing now, run and test. And here I have given like Azure. So you can see under the log, it is connected, it has been executed, and you can see the log details that how much time it has taken within few seconds. Okay, what if I do, so you can see the input and output. What if I change the input to decode cloud solutions and I run this? See, this is again run in 1 milliseconds now. But this is something which I have just test and run in the Azure portal itself. What if I want to run it at a browser? So I will get the function URL, copy this, and will keep that in here. So you can see last time when you have run this, you have used this, the name of your function, and the by default domain which you are using for this function app. You can replace that with your own custom domain name as well. That is a different step we are talking about. But here, if you match this, what it has used the same URL address. However, it has mentioned that, okay, which API we are using as a trigger, HTTP1, and the code. This is the code, and let me pass on something as in, let me give that, maybe that will be something name which I'm talking about in here. So yes, I'm going to pass on a value in here, name, and this time let me pass on my name and press enter. So you can see this has been run in the browser now. You can check this link at your end as well. I'm sharing that on a chat window. You can change the parameter value name from the SHA to anything else which you want to see. I can do it right now as well. And you will be able to run that. Okay, so this was a very small demonstration on how Azure function run and I use the HTTP trigger. So what I can do, I can share this link, or we will upload this video on our YouTube channel where you can see that. So thank you. Thank you for being in the session. It was a very small, quick introduction about the Azure function to you. If you have any question, please let me know.